You are Locked On Coogs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Doing today, full disclosure, let's actually go through this. I anticipated going through 2 segments of offensive coordinator candidates with you, having a last segment about whatever the Big 12 rankings were in the college football playoff, having a night. Wrote some notes on that. Went out and coached a basketball game. My phone is blowing up during the game. We won. We're okay. Come back to check my phone afterwards. I'm like, holy... Right? Like, I had a bunch of stuff to do very quickly. And immediately I could kind of see through my watch, like what was happening, what was going on. And I couldn't really believe exactly what was happening. And then I get closer into it and I was like, oh God. And so while Houston's doing all those defensive coordinator, there's more to figure out on that. The offensive coordinator is a position that Houston knew they were getting into this week after relieving Kevin Barbay of his duties going into the final game and using Shawn Bell as the interim. Now, in all the madness of the Shield Wood news, Duarte kind of leaked a little bit of, like, not a bomb, like, was it like a hand grenade? Like a little bit of news that I think is worth pointing out. And he said that it sounds like internally, just kind of as a throwaway line, that Houston had hoped to have and thinks they could have an offense coordinator by the end of this week, right? Now, the Shield Wood news is so big, I think a lot of people read over it really quickly, but that echoes some things I was kind of getting the feeling from as well. And so that makes me think it's one of a handful of guys. And I do want to go through, I guess, where those guys could be coming from. And I guess the first guy is probably the hardest name to pronounce, which is not good on my behalf. But Jim Svoboda is a Midwest guy and was close with Willie Fritz from his time in the Midwest, and also from their time at Tulane. He coached the offense at Tulane in 2022, but Jim Svoboda got out of coaching in 2022. He was in his early 60s then. He's about 64 now. He got out of coaching to go back to the Midwest and be close to family. Now, I wonder if after a couple years off, does Houston have some inkling that he has the itch? Did Houston maybe have that inkling back when they relieved Kevin Barbay of his duties? Was that maybe the trigger for when that all started to go down? Like, what part of the chapter was he in there? What chapter of the book, I should say, was he in there? If it is Jim Svoboda, I would imagine that's a match made in heaven for Fritz because they get along so well. They're very much in tune and in sync. They put together a pretty strong roster at Tulane. I would imagine you'd keep a lot of the same positional staff on, and that will help with the recruiting as well. And then Svoboda, obviously has a complementary system to the kinds of things that Willie Fritz wants to do. So Jim Svoboda is one I've got on this. Speaking of Tulane, we talked about Tulane a lot with this Willie Fritz era. Slade Nagel was the offensive coordinator with Fritz in his final year at Tulane. And he took a $500,000 gig to go coach tight ends at LSU. Now, he did serve as the interim head coach after Fritz left. He, I think, is pretty well respected in coaching circles. He's a Louisiana guy, which is not out of our recruiting realm. But I wonder, so you look at, he's making, I think his 2025 salary is set to be $525,000 coach tight ends LSU. Houston can definitely pay more than that to be the offensive coordinator here. We know that Nagel and Fritz have a good relationship. Again, Tulane connection. We know that Nagel has run an effective offense. Think about that 2023 Tulane offense. Very, very strong. Pratt was American Athletic Conference, this and the other. I mean, it was a very strong offense, both in the quarterback's room, the running back room, the offensive line blocked things up well. It was good, right? And so does Slade Nagel have the itch to get back to calling plays? And after having a taste of being lower on the totem pole or getting out of the offense at LSU, do you go get him by throwing him more money than that $525,000? I think that's a very realistic possibility. I really do. Before I get to my last thought on guys that I think it's going to be short and sweet and to the point, one guy I was intrigued by that I hadn't really talked a lot about yet was Joe Price. Joe Price III, I should say, is the pass game coordinator at UTSA. He's got extensive high school experience in the Houston area. UTSA had a really good offense this past year, even after they moved on from that like 12-year quarterback or whatever they had going on there before, right? UTSA feels like a staff that's right for the picking, because it just feels like a matter of time until their head coach moves on to a bigger gig, right? And so, do you go get Joe Price, the pass game coordinator, and give him a bump there? He'd be pretty gettable. He's got Houston connections as far as the city goes. I think that's an easy option. And obviously, I'm a big fan of Brennan Marion. I'm a big fan out at UNLV and the Go-Go offense. I'm a big fan of Jordan Davis up at North Texas, and they had an incredible offense this year. If you want to go back and check some of the numbers on what they were doing in Denton, I think either guy would be a great option. I don't know that they'd be the fast hire that it feels like is being made, unless, frankly, they just saw Houston as a bigger gig because it's in the Power Four, which is fair. It is. That'd be one of my pitches. I think the other way this could be fast, though, is if it's just Shawn Bell getting promoted. And I say just because we saw him as the interim, not because I'd be disappointed in it. With Shawn Bell in just a week, really less than a week, because his first practice was Tuesday and they played on Saturday, you saw Shawn Bell have a lot of substantial improvements with the exact same roster. I mean, multiple drives that had clear plans in them where you're making like play calls with certain plans and certain things that featured guys. You saw Boogie Johnson featured very prominently. Boogie had a kind of cryptic tweet on Tuesday about having to make sure his last year in college next year counted. Well, what better way than to get an offensive coordinator that featured you in the only game that got to call plays in like Shawn Bell did? It would be the fastest option here. I frankly would almost be like, why haven't they already announced it if it's him, right? Like, what other digging did they do? If anything, hiring him officially, formally promoting him later this week would almost feel slow given who it is, right? And then the biggest thing into Shawn Bell is not just that he's young, he's comes from a coaching family and coaching tree, both very literally. Um, Shawn Bell is, reputed to be one of the great coordinators in college football, right? Did a lot of things at Baylor when they were getting all these big name recruits and stuff like that. Had Baylor in the top 3 for DJ Lagway before he went to Florida and so on, right? Shawn Bell comes to Houston. A big part of that is recruiting, because the things he can do in the state of Texas with recruiting and the way he closes deals with recruits and stuff like that. Once the guy's got a taste of being an offensive coordinator, you wonder if the recruiting aspect he brings is worth keeping him on as the OC, because frankly, he didn't give you any reason to not keep him on as the OC. The offense was a lot better in the game he was in charge of. It wasn't perfect, but he also had to deal with the roster limitations he had to deal with, right? And so as the roster gets better through things like his own recruiting, do you think he can pull those kinds of things around? And if it's fast, like Duarte and others might have insinuated, if it's this week, that would make sense. But you're trying to get at the front of the portal season, but also with signing day, guys that have committed to Houston would have some. I mean, their position coaches would all assume still be intact. Their connections. Austin Carlisle, right, was recruited by Shawn Bell as a quarterbacks coach, right? That those kinds of things are important. Carlisle's going to be a big part of this program's future. And for what it's worth, in all the coaching changes he has maintained, he is signing with Houston on signing day, and he's coming to school in January as an early enrollee. Like, he's coming to school here. And so that matters too. So I could see it being any of those guys. Honestly, while I've expressed how much I like the go-go offense selfishly as a guy that likes coaching and the X's and O's, and I'm incredibly impressed by what Jordan Davis did up at North Texas. If it's going to be fast, I almost lean into Shawn Bell because I think the positive side of things can outweigh others. And so I guess that's where I sit on it. But if if I'm wrong again, the second big one I'm wrong on this week, and we'll talk about it as we talk about it, as we do each and every day here at Locked On Coogs. Now, I want to spend a second talking some about the Big 12 getting screwed. Spoiler, Big 12 got screwed again, just like we thought they would. But before we get to that, if you think you can predict the future about the coordinators or whatever, you probably need to head over to FanDuel, because FanDuel is America's #1 sports book. And right now you can get in on the action by putting down $5 and getting $150 back in bonus bets if that first bet hits. FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. When you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more all on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com. Join today. Just get started with $150 back in bonus bets if your first $5 bet hits at FanDuel.com. Now, where's the hunch? Make everyone more. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL.